Good afternoon, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, and cherished members of our community. It is with great honor and enthusiasm that I warmly welcome you all to today's lecture, organized under the auspices of the Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies, as part of the Global African Diaspora Lecture Series. We gather here today to celebrate the richness of African cultural heritage and to immerse ourselves in the art of storytelling, a cornerstone of our collective identity. This event, hosted here at the African University of Communications and Business, reflects our ongoing commitment to fostering intellectual discourse, cultural preservation, and a sense of shared history. As we prepare to engage with today's discussion, I encourage us all to reflect on the transformative power of storytelling, not just as a means of preserving history, but as a tool for inspiring future generations. Thank you for being part of this momentous occasion, and may it be both enlightening and inspiring for us all. Let us proceed to enjoying an afternoon filled with knowledge and cultural exchange. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Or greetings for our viewers online who may be in a different time zone. My name is Professor Mankutam, also known as Tracy Keith Fleming. I serve as the acting director of the Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies here at the African University of Communications and Business. I'd like to welcome you to the KNCAS Global African Diaspora Lecture Series. On behalf of the university, we are delighted to welcome you to this platform that is dedicated to insightful discussions on the experiences, contributions, and impact of continental Africa and the African diaspora. This series brings together scholars, thought leaders, and change makers to explore the rich tapestry of continental African and African diasporic history, culture, and innovation. We look forward to an engaging conversation that inspires new perspectives and meaningful connections. The Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies is committed to becoming a leading center for Pan-African scholarship and collaboration, bringing together scholars and thinkers from the African world to conduct research and deliberate on issues affecting the welfare and destiny of African peoples, and to disseminate their findings as widely as possible. Additionally, the center will be an incubator for innovative research to generate new knowledge that advances professional practice for those at the cutting edge of transformative development. The center contributes significantly to the university's mission of, quote, preparing lifelong learners to become innovative problem solvers and ethical leaders in the fields of communication, business, and related areas through excellence in interdisciplinary teaching, research, and collaboration at the local, regional, and global levels using a Pan-African framework, unquote, as well as to the university's core value of embracing African cultural values. This university is not merely a university in Africa with an African label. It is an African university with an ethos and the explicit intent to produce graduates who fully understand, appreciate, and unapologetically manifest their Africanness in all spheres of their lives. The need to provide an education at the tertiary level that enhances the self-awareness of students as Africans led to the establishment in 2009 of this center. The Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies was officially launched under its current name on the 22nd of June, 2015, as an interdisciplinary institution dedicated to the creation and advancement of knowledge about the peoples and cultures of Africa and the African diaspora through scholarly research, teaching, and publication aimed at the regeneration of African peoples and societies. Once again, it is my pleasure to welcome you and to thank you for joining us. Thank you.
You are welcome once again to the Africana Studies at the Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies. And then today we are diving into the topic of missing snails and palm fruits, storytelling among the Larteh people. And then our speaker for today's presentation is Dr. Edwin Asa Adjei. Now the profile of our speaker. Dr. Edwin Asa Adjei is a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. He holds a Ph.D. in African Studies from the University of Ghana, with his dissertation focused on violence in African young adult fiction. His research interests center on African children and young adult literature, that is oral and then written, and literary performance among citizens and young adults as tools for socialization. Of particular interest to him is the manner in which literature and literary performance may both embody and act upon social constructions among cultures globally and especially in Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, without wasting much time, shall you join me in welcoming our speaker for today's program, Dr. Edwin Asa Adjei.
Good afternoon, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here with you this afternoon. It's my first time here, and I think it's a beautiful place. I'll start by saying thank you to Dr. Mankutam, as I call him, for this opportunity. Dr. Mankutam gave me my first opportunity to write my first self-authored paper many years ago. This was 2019, and so if I've come this far, he has played a part in it. I would also like to say a big thank you to Prof. Aduma Kwampofu, who is online. She taught me the ABCs of research, and Prof, I'm still very grateful for that. And my mother, who was my research assistant when we went to do this field work, is also online. So Mama Irene, as we all call you, thank you for leading me to do this field research, and thank you to all of you, both online and in person, for being here. This afternoon, I'm not here to talk about food, even though you see a lot of pictures about food, and I hope everybody has had their lunch. Why snails and palm fruits? So many years ago, I was told that the Larteh people like their palm nut soup with snails so much that when they see the palm fruits, they say chiochu, which means look at soup, just by seeing the fruit. And so it is out of this that I came up with the title. But for this paper, for this presentation, the story is the fufu that we are talking about. And the palm fruit here would refer to the storytelling performance, and the snails would refer to the songs. So in summary, what I'm saying is that we have fufu, but the palm fruit and the snails are missing. What am I looking at in this research? And please be changing the slides as it. So I'm looking at the state of storytelling among the Larteh, and then the implications of the state of storytelling. And before I start, I would like to, in terms of my position, I would say that even though I'm not from Larteh, my auntie would always remind me that my navel was buried there. That is where I was born, and that is where I grew up. And so, if you ask me, I will tell you that is my hometown, even though on paper, that is not my hometown. I left the place so many years ago, about 20, 25 years ago, and so the language, I am not so familiar with it as it is now. When we are talking about storytelling, we cannot get away from the fact that it's a part of literature. And literature plays several roles in our society, including entertainment, consolation, historical roles, educational purposes, inspiration, asserting nationalistic feelings, and as a way of helping us to mourn. And when we are talking about storytelling, we are talking about the transmission of imagination, weaving our complex connections with each other to share, to teach, to bond. And the stories that are about our life force, stories about our existence. And this is by Krebs. And Collins also describes storytelling as relating a tale to one or more listeners through voice and gestures, stories that are socially constructed accounts of past events. And when we are talking about storytelling in Africa, Osa is telling us that for generations, Africans have told stories in their multitudinous indigenous tongues to children and young people, and to adults as well in their social, informal or formal gatherings. For the majority of Africans then, storytelling is not a new art, but one as old as the African continent itself. In the oral tradition, for example, African folk tales are meant for education and entertainment abound on the continent. End of quote. On the screen now is a picture of Larteh, which shows you Larteh and their neighbors. And one of the first things you would notice is that even though there are a few Guan-speaking communities around them, a lot of the communities around them are Ekwapim. And this is key to the storytelling traditions and its challenges that I am talking about. When we are talking about the Larteh language, now the people are Larteh people, but they prefer to call their language Larteh. So Larteh is the language and the people are Larteh. That's the difference between the two. And so Larteh is a South Guan language of the Kwa branch of Ghanaian languages under the Niger-Congo phylum. It is a minority language, and when we are talking about minority languages, it is a contested term about which languages deserve to be majority and which ones deserve to be minority. But since the linguists haven't come up with alternatives, for now we would call it a minority language. It's also less studied, and for those who are Larteh speakers, they are bilingual. So Larteh is the first language which is used mostly in the home, with Ekwapimchi as the second language, and that's the language used in schools and in general activities, and English as the official language of Ghana as we know it. And so when I started school, for example, when you go to school, all the education was being done in Twi. We're not being taught English. I had to come and learn how to speak English in Accra. And so that was my reality. When we are talking about storytelling amongst the Larteh, Sekoni tells us that storytelling is a form of oral narrative performance, and like other speech acts, it's a communicative system in which a social discourse takes place primarily between a narrator or performer and an audience. And so when I interviewed my participants for this research, they indicated that in the past, and this is before I was born, the signal that there was going to be a storytelling performance was that when you see the fufu being prepared with the palm nut soup and the snails, you know that something is happening that evening. So the fufu and the palm nut soup with snails was a very symbolic thing, aside the fact that they really liked it. When you see it, you know something is happening that evening, and that was storytelling. And as they were telling the stories, they would be roasting plantain. That would be their dessert. Now the letter stories follow a similar pattern as account stories. And so it has a beginning, and then a main story, an interlude, and an ending. And it's accompanied by singing and dancing to further the story or to arrest boredom. And Yanka tells us that even when there is no song in a tale's plot, any member of the audience in certain cultures may petition the narrator and lead a song to arrest boredom. The song interjected may have no thematic relevance to the tale at hand, but like the intra-narrative lyric, it enlists total participation by the petitioner, narrator, and the rest of the audience. Songs in folk tales have simple choruses and lend themselves easily to communal involvement, drumming, and dancing. This compels total immersion by the entire congregation, who may provide background rhythm by clapping or beating on improvised instruments. So how did I collect the data for this presentation? So I was at Larteh with my mother, who led me to the people who were supposed to go to, and we spent a lot of time there recording storytelling sessions and taking part in the storytelling sessions ourselves. And for this work, I grouped the storytellers into two groups. And the reason is the vast age difference between the people who told stories. So we had those between 50 and 90 years, whom I have named elderly storytellers, and then the very young people between 8 and 30. And in terms of gender, for the elderly storytellers, we had 1 male and 3 females. And for the young storytellers, we had 6 males and 4 females. In all, I collected 20 stories, 10 from the young storytellers and 10 from the old storytellers. And after this, I interviewed the storytellers and those who participated in the storytelling session. Now, to continue with what I was saying concerning the language, Ghana's cultural policy tells us that it shall be recognized that the mother tongue is a vital aspect of cultural identity and vehicle for the expression and transmission of cultural values. And Akpanglo Nate and Akpanglo Nate are telling us that Guan languages in Ghana, with the exception of Gonja in northern Guan, lack vitality. So when we are talking about the Guans, there are Guans in the eastern region, Guans in the central region, that's the Futus, and then Guans in the Volta region as well, and then those up north. And we are being told, based on research, that all of them lack vitality except the Gonja. And to analyze this for the purpose of this presentation, I used the social aesthetics theory, which talks about the fact that the whole gamut of sociocultural conventions, patterns, and practices that embody the appreciation and production of cultural norms and practices, as well as entertainment and social interaction amongst individuals or communities. And when it comes to this paper, my emphasis is on aspects of social aesthetics that impinge on language use, aesthetic variation, and creativity in storytelling, and on processes of active audience participation in the delivery and interpretation of oral performances. So what did I find when I went there? My findings are summed up in the proverb that says that "Duari bewua ifri nase na infri nemkona." And in English, that would be, if a tree is dying, it is from its roots and not from its branches. And this proverb is explained by Apia and Ajimandia to say that whatever happens has a root cause. And so I put this tree there by this river to tell my story. So what did I find when I went there? I found out that even though I was able to collect a lot of stories, the storytelling traditions of the Larteh people were mostly dying, and along with it was their language. So what I found out was that while the elderly storytellers were able to tell me the stories in the Larteh language, the young people could not. So they could either tell the stories in English or in a Kwapin Twi. And this tells us that there is a challenge, because if the younger generation are having challenges with speaking the language, it means that the ability to transfer the language to the next generation is a problem that we are going to soon have on our hands. And I also realized that when the elderly storytellers were telling their stories, so for example, if they were telling a story about Kweku Anansi going for a funeral mourning, they would be mourning, mimicking the art of mourning. If Kweku Anansi was eating, they would be talking about eating the foods he was eating, giving examples. But the younger storytellers did not know how to do this. In addition to that, the songs that accompanied the stories, the elderly generation knew how to interrupt the storytelling session, bring in a song that would either further the story or just to change the atmosphere. And what I found out is that the younger generation, including myself, we couldn't do that. And so they would teach us what we had to do when they were singing, and yet, within a few minutes you forget, because that's not a part of you. And then at a point when one elderly storyteller was telling a story, I drew her attention to the fact that I didn't understand certain things she was saying, and she got angry. And she sang a song that literally was to insult me. And unfortunately, I didn't understand the song too. So I had to ask her for the interpretation of the insult. And so one of the things we find out is that there is a loss of the storytelling traditions. What are the implications of this? Now, when we are talking about storytelling, there are the parts of it that are manifest. So we are telling stories for entertainment, for relaxation, to teach morals, and to do so many things. But in addition to these things, there are hidden functions of storytelling. And some of these include helping the next generation to grasp the language, enhancing creativity, teaching about the flora and fauna and the indigenous professions of the people. The storytelling traditions teach you about the people and their cultures. And so in losing these traditions, we are also losing the functions that the storytelling tradition is supposed to be playing in the community, which also includes losing the identity of the people. And as Harrison reminds us, languages are repositories for cultural knowledge, which implies that the loss of languages means the loss of treasures within these languages. And so when I found out some of these things, and let me say I am not the first person to do research on the language of the Larteh people or their storytelling traditions. I built on what Bello did in 2013. For her master's thesis, she did her research on language vitality amongst the Larteh. And one of the things that I found out is that a lot of people who have done some research on the Larteh people have focused on the language, and they haven't paid much attention to their storytelling or their storytelling traditions. And so, for example, in Bello's work, she dedicated just half a page to the storytelling traditions of the people. And when she went there, they told her how to start a story, and she did her research mostly with the royal family. Now, when I went there and I asked that I wanted stories to be told, I was told that they started a story with Abrabro. And Abrabro is how you start a story in Twi. So I told them, no, I want you to tell me the story in the language, how you tell it. And they had to go around asking and asking and asking before one elderly woman was able to tell us that to start a story in the Larteh language, you start with esote, which means receive a story, and the response is eniso. We receive the story. And even though the elderly woman told us that a lot of the storytellers would still start with abra abru and had to be corrected. So it tells you even how to start a story and how to end the story had already been lost. In addition to that, I also found out that a lot of the songs that they were singing were songs that were coming from Twi. So they would simply translate the song into Larteh and sing as part of the song. So when I came back, I was having a discussion with an elderly colleague and asking her, does this mean that the songs have been lost? Or what happened to the songs? And this is a debate we are still having, because I realized that there were very few of the songs, about 3 or 4 of them, that were originally from the language. The majority were simply being translated from Twi. So how do we restore the language, the storytelling traditions? What am I doing about this? And here, I am saying that the attempt to revitalize languages must include the oral traditions of a people as they play a key part in the intergenerational language transfer. And the Ghana Cultural Policy also reminds us that it shall be recognized that the mother tongue is a vital aspect of cultural identity and a vehicle for the expression and transmission of cultural values. So what is being done? And here I realized that some of my senior colleagues in my department had taken the lead. So Prof. Mesia Kofi Ansa has been working on the Larteh language, and she's an expert on the language. And what she is doing is working on creating an orthography for the language, because the language is not written. And so we don't have literature in the language. And so what she has started doing is working with other linguists to create an orthography for the language, so the language can be written in order for us not to lose it. In addition, my senior colleague, who is my head of section, also has a similar challenge amongst the Kusasi. And what she has done is to restart recording their stories. And the link that is there is a link to her website where she has placed the stories. And what she has done is to start creating cartoons with these stories. But the cartoons will come with subtext in English, but originally the voice is in the language of the people. So that first of all, it would attract both children and adults, but at the same time, whilst you are understanding, you are also learning the language. And then also from Efwa Sutherland, who has 2 rhythmic plays. And for those who are Akans, you will be familiar with some of these stories. You would know Tehinta. How many of us know Debbie Mikohu Samai Ketinketi? Exactly. That very song. She has written a story with it. And if you don't have a copy of it, please get a copy. You get a copy of it at the African Studies Library or Afram Publications. And what she has done is to make it a rhythmic story. So as you are listening to it, it comes with the drum language, and she explains it to you, so that whilst you listen to it, you also learn about the culture of the people. And also, if Sutherland set up Kozibang in the central region where you can visit, and they will tell you stories in the Fanti language. Now, these people have laid foundations that can be followed. And so what I told myself is, yes, I have started. Now I have identified this challenge that the language has, the people have. And so the next thing is to look at how others have resolved or attempted to resolve similar challenges in their communities, and to build on it. So that as I build on it, the meal that has been lost, the snails and the palm soup that has been lost, will be restored among the Larteh people. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Okay, let's give Dr. Adjei another round of applause. hope that you all have some questions, concerns, etc. Would anyone like to start? I usually start the questions, but I'd like to give you an opportunity. You'd like for me to start? Oh, yes. Jonah will start today. And could you repeat the question, at least the summary, so that people online can hear?
Okay.
Alright, yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the presentation. My question is, ever since you embark on this storytelling journey, going into college data, have you come across any means that, okay, though palm fruits and snails have this back, with this strategy and that strategy, we are trying to get them back, or something like that?
Have I come across any strategy about
from there?
From the people themselves? Well, so in my interviews, I asked them what the challenges were. And some attributed the challenge to education and the fact that now when the children go to school, they spend the whole day in school. And by the time they will close, get home with a lot of homework, there is no time for you to spend time with them, telling them stories. And so I didn't find any strategy from the people themselves. But like I said, these are people that I call my own. My very novel is buried there. And so if there is a problem with the language, it affects me too. And me myself, as I mentioned, I grew up there, but I've lost most of the language because I don't visit regularly. And so I'm a culprit myself. The language is going because I'm also not very fluent with it. My own father, who is not from there, learned the language and was able to communicate with us in it, communicate with my mother in it. And so it facilitated the learning of the language for all of us as siblings. But because I am losing the language, it means that if something is not done about it, it means it would be difficult for me to pass this on to my children, unless probably I go and leave them with my mother to teach them the language. But then the older generation, whatever we do, they would leave us one day, and it's up to us to do whatever we can to preserve the language and its value to us and to the people, because it's not just the language that you lose. It is everything about the people and their identity that you would lose as well. So I didn't get answers from the people themselves, but then, like I said, there are other scholars who have also recognized this challenge and are trying to do their best to ensure that we restore these languages. And I'm also playing my part through the storytelling aspect of it.
Excellent question and response. Thank you very much. Additional questions, concerns, observations? Who would like to go next? Okay, so I will ask a question. And I really like the fact that your creative title, which is based on indigenous concepts, and your emphasis on the fact that storytelling is ancient to Africa. I wanted to ask a question that was inspired by your methodology. It's interdisciplinary, it's innovative, is in fact African-centered. So I'm wondering, how can we encourage students as well as the general public to use this or similar kinds of approaches to African studies? Again, I mentioned it's interdisciplinary, there's anthropological aspects, there's African-centered in the sense that Kwame Nkrumah articulated what African-centeredness would be. I would say it's Afrocentric. It's very innovative, right? He didn't take himself outside of the story. I love that you integrated, or this study was your mother helped to facilitate these contexts. How can we encourage more people to take this approach? I know I'm talking a lot, but I work with graduate students frequently, and they usually shy away from these types of approaches, and it's a very mechanical approach to thinking about research. So how can we encourage students to take these types of steps that you have so brilliantly outlined in your own work?
Thank you, Dr. Mankutam, for the question. So it starts, as I would always say, from the foundation. And I remember when I came earlier, we were having a discussion about how we would go to school and be taught all about the Greek things and American literature, Greek literature, the epics. And you'd grow up not knowing that we've had epics in Ghana, epics in the Sahel region. We don't know about our proverbs, and yet we know all about Marvel comics and everything in DC. And so the foundation is where we have the biggest challenge, because what it means is that as teachers and academics, we are not teaching our students these things. I had to learn some of these things at the Institute of African Studies, where during my master's, actually, the part that I enjoyed most was the field trips, where the institute would give you some money to go and do some field trip, and you would report back to the institute on it. It was fun, challenging, but at the end of the day, we learned so much when it came to research, because now you go to the field report, and for example, one of the field trips I did, I came back and I said, you know something, there is this person who said, if you want to interview me, I want Vitamilk. That is what she requested for. And this is an elderly person that you can't go and give one bottle of Vitamilk. And you can't go and put money in her hands. She says she wants Vitamilk. But then this is also an issue bordering on ethics. So if I go and give this woman Vitamilk, what happens? And then we got there, and this woman is blind, so she couldn't see. So she said, you know something, what I'm going to tell you, I want to tell you, but don't record it. And then when I'm done, I want to make sure it's up to University of Ghana standard. When I'm done, then now when I tell you to record, you can record, so that once you give the go ahead, I know this is up to the standard you want. Now this person cannot see, and she's elderly. So my first inclination is, what if this person forgets all that she's telling me? Do I record or I shouldn't record? The person won't even know whether I recorded or not. So I recorded. And then when I came back and I had to come and report on it, they said, no, this is an ethics issue. It's the person who has the information, has the knowledge, and the person has told you, do not record me. I am telling you things that I don't want recorded. So if you recorded it, it is a breach of ethics. You did not respect what the person wanted. And so through such approaches, fieldwork, coming back to report and all of that, we learned some of these things on the ground, on the field. And that is how some of us, and I would encourage this approach. You know, learning research, learning methodology sounds wonderful when you are reading in a book. But when you go to the field itself and you experience what happens on the field, it becomes a part of you. And so this is the approach that for me, I would recommend that we should use in teaching our students so that they grasp these African-centered approaches right from the start. And then it becomes a part of them for their future. Thank you.
Excellent response. I love that response. I wish I could answer questions that way. Another question, comment, observation.
Those online, in case they have questions.
Yes, I've instructed those online they can also ask questions as well. Yes. Comment, question. I should go again. Yes. Okay, let's see. I always read questions. Well, this one is a related question, and it's a topic that's come up on various listservs about transference of knowledge, particularly in our school systems, or to intergenerational transfer of knowledge. So, what suggestions, as someone who does African-centered research, how can we encourage African-centered education in Ghana? There are groups that have formed called African-centered education in Ghana. They are primarily from the Western world, and they're trying to implement an African-centered educational approach to K through 12 education like you find in some sectors of America. But they're trying to do it in Ghana this time. How can we encourage that type of educational official policy in Ghana?
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting one that I think the challenge we have had is the fact that even though we have some policy, the policy itself is facing challenges. And so it's not just about policy, but also about implementation of policy. So for example, our educational policy tells us that until you are in class 2, we should be teaching you your local language. This is the kind of education I had. So when I came to Accra, as I mentioned, the only English words I knew were go and come. So whether you were doing maths or science or whatever, we were being taught in Twi. And if you are being taught in Twi, it means that you are learning about your own people, your own language, your own land that you live on. I don't know how many of this generation know Achampong. Achampong, not the name Achampong. It's a plant, it's a leaf. I don't know how many of this generation know that. But this is a leaf, for example, that if you are bleeding and you put it on it, it will stop the bleeding in a very, very short time. Today, if you show most of people of this generation that plant, it's a weed. Because you went to school and learned all these scientific things that didn't teach you about your own land. They didn't teach you about your own people. And so if we are going to succeed in laying the foundations, the policy itself must work. And if the policy is not going to work, then what it means is that we have become, as Du Bois said, we have multiple consciousness. So we think white and yet we behave black. This is the challenge that a lot of the people who are going to school now have. So we have people who are proud to say, my child cannot speak Twi. My child cannot speak Ga. My child cannot speak. And you would meet people who, they themselves cannot even speak English, but they are forcing to speak English with their child. Instead of teaching the child the local language so that the child can build. And what most of us don't know is, if you learn the local language, learning any other international language is very easy. Within 1 year of coming to Accra, I won an award for the best English speaker. This was just in 1 year. And I was now learning to speak English. Because you will translate your subject-verb agreement, your way of thinking, your way of writing, straight into the English language. And this is what you are going to apply in your writing. So when we deprive the children of this, we are asking them to think in a way that is foreign to them. They cannot relate to the land in which they live. It's difficult for them, and yet we seem not to understand that. Let me just say, we have a generation that wants to go abroad. We have trained them for a life abroad, not for a life here. But we don't understand why they are struggling to cope here. They can't even get what they would eat. The person wants to eat pizza at a McDonald's instead of fufu or kenke. The person doesn't understand why pizza is so expensive when they can get the fufu or the banku, which is a healthier option. So these are challenges we are creating for ourselves by not applying the policy the way it is. Because the policy, the intention behind it was to lay a foundation for every Ghanaian child. But the international school system would say, okay, we want them to be able to speak and write English early, and of course everybody is from a different ethnic group, so let's use English, which is neutral. But in doing so, we've all lost aspects of ourselves. And so we have a generation coming up that is not really learning our language. Unfortunately for us, linguists are telling us that every 100 years we lose about 50% of languages. And this is the path that we are on. So the Guan languages are going. If we don't do anything about it, Dr. Abubakari is online. She is talking about how the Kusal is having its own challenges. if we don't do anything about these languages, a time will come, maybe it won't be your time, but when your grandchildren come, the language wouldn't exist anymore, along with all these indigenous knowledge systems that we would want the next generation to have. Thank you.
Excellent response. Thank you very much. I think we have a question online from Dr. Nee Hammond. I'm going to try to ask him to unmute.
My question is about your research findings. People have this feeling that storytelling is for kids, also for children. And so what was your experience? Were you able to discover the various age groups, the stories for the various age sets? Because my own research showed that there were stories for nubile girls and boys and so on. Do they still have this? And would you say that the lack of storytelling in our communities is also a measure of the ancestral disconnect that we are plagued with at this moment? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Okwe. Very interesting question. And yes, I did find out that they have stories for various occasions. So, for example, I was told that in the past, during wake keeping, as we call it, when there is a dead body there and the family is sitting through the night, they would tell stories to keep themselves awake and be roasting plantain. Of course, as for the plantain, I don't know what it is with the plantain and the roasting as a snack, but this is what they used to do. So they would tell stories to keep themselves awake, and during that period, it was assumed that children would not be there. So these were the times when they would tell stories that we in English have called adult humor tales. These are stories that have a lot of eroticism in them, and they would dance erotic dances during that period. And so that should tell you that these things were there, these stories where people are trying to find spouses. I don't know why at a funeral, but it's assumed that space was safe for them to do these things. Now, as you and I know, it is rare to go and meet storytelling taking place during wake keeping. We would have some music. Some communities have even banned it. In the eastern region, I know most parts of the eastern region, especially on the ridge, wake keeping has been banned, including at Larteh. So you wouldn't go and meet these things now. There is no wake keeping, and so these stories are not being told. So I didn't get to record any of them, but I got to see the dances that they used to do. They couldn't tell me these stories because there were children around, so they were not going to tell me such stories. But I got to see some of the dances, and they were quite impressive. Very, very impressive. And yes, I agree with you that losing these stories also shows how we are disconnected from our ancestors, because these stories tell us about their lives, their experiences, the knowledge systems of our ancestors. They literally tell us everything about our culture. And so if we are losing them, then we are losing everything that our ancestors have handed over to us. And so yes, I definitely agree with you on that point. Thank you.
Wonderful response. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. Question, concerns, observations? Don't be shy. Madam.
So, I think I observed some few things. For instance, when you went to the old lady, while she was the one claiming for, how do you call it, Vitamalt.
Vitamalt.
I think it's traditional that when you're going somewhere, you always prepare for a drink, but you budget for that, and it shouldn't have asked first. And then secondly, incorporating all this into our system. I heard the speaker, when all this Mulabalu of ethical thing came into parliament, he was was like the old system has to be reintroduced into the curriculum and then make it more, how do you call it, citizen, but not individual education as it is now. Because previously, I know there's something like, there's a day for moral day when I was in school. All these are no more. So, for instance, how do I put it? The foreign aspect of it is more into it. And so far, what has gone on into those systems? Because it looks like the curriculums are already out. And do you have any knowledge of what's going on or what I'm saying right now?
So in terms of incorporating these things into our curriculum, let me say that Ghana, our curriculum literally now, we are changing it every time a new political party comes in. And as we are standing here, we are told that the curriculum is being revised. And so I don't know what is going to come out in the next one. So it will be difficult for me to predict, but I agree with you that there are aspects of the way of life that we used to have that we should bring back. And I agree with what you said concerning the speaker, that now we have become more individualistic, selfish, so everybody is thinking about their spouse, their children, without looking at the implications of hoarding it all for their family on the bigger community. And so, yes, I agree with the speaker on some of these things. I agree with the teaching of the morals. Growing up, I think we had, when I was in senior high school, we had RME, religious and moral education, where you would learn both about Islam, Christianity, traditional religion, their tenets, and how you should apply them in your life. But even before, I think when I was in JSS, we had music and dance. It was a part of our curriculum. We had vocational skills as part of our curriculum. All these things were scrapped even before I completed senior high school. I mean, I went through them, but those after did not get to learn some of these things, and they've still not been brought back. So I still sew because I was taught to sew in school. I was taught a lot of arts in school. We were doing cooking and all these things in school. Both boys and girls were engaged in all these things. It wasn't about gender. We were all doing these things, and so you grow up knowing how to do things for yourself. We were learning the African dances, the African songs, the patriotic songs. Now even the patriotic songs, we are no longer learning them in school. So I agree with you that we have to bring some of these things back. As to whether they will be in the new curriculum, I cannot tell, but I can only hope that even if it's not in the curriculum, as individuals, as parents, we would make it our part to hand this knowledge over to our children and the next generation. I have nieces and nephews who will tell me that, as for you, every time we come to your house, you give us something to read. And I make sure that they have something related to the way of life. I'm always searching for something new for them, whether it's a game, something for them to read, something for them to listen to, so that every time there is something new, you know, children, you give them something, by the next time they say, oh, this one I've listened to, is that ready before? So I have to make sure there is always something new before they come. I'm always on the lookout, searching. And so when I found out, for example, Dr. Abubakari's website, for example, now every time they come, if I don't have a new book, at least I know there is a website, and the website has several stories, gender, she's put them into categories: gender, education, morals, religion. There are so many subsections. So depending on which subsection you go, there are so many stories. And so I know that every point in time, even if I don't have something new, that website is available for me to visit, and then they get to learn something before now they can do what they also want to do. So thank you so much.
The basis happen to be very important, because they were doing well with the STEM, but it looks like where they pick it from for them to learn is not, the approach is really not appropriate. You know, it's no more African. And That's what I think.
Yeah.
They going beyond the norms of the tradition before they incorporate, how do you call it, the technological part of it. That's the observation I think I have there. So maybe we wait for the curriculum and see what
Very good.
what happens.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions online. Any additional comments, questions from the audience here in person? Okay. I want to ask it's a topic you've been alluding to, but I want to ask it because I want a more explicit answer, even though it's a bit controversial, but nothing incriminating. Why do our educated people seem to uncritically embrace Westernization? Because I think it has a lot to do with how their receptive, how receptive they are to talks about storytelling among the Larteh people. Do you think, what are some of the reasons that you think that our educated strata, when I say educated, I mean formally educated, even though there are different types of educated people, but the common conception of what an educated person is in Ghana, why are they so uncritically embracing Westernization?
I think this is what we've been taught right from childhood. That, for example, by the time you would go to the crèche and you are taught A for apple and B for ball, you've already started. So we lay the foundations right from there. And then, for example, I don't know why, but I'm yet to see people selling children's clothes, for example, that are African. When you go to the mother care shops, these are all imported clothes. And so we start them right from childhood. Right from the time they are babies, we are feeding them all kinds of formula imported from abroad. Even though we have, my mother would tell you, for example, that when I was a baby, I didn't get to eat any of these imported foods. First, the resources were not there for that. But aside that, they knew that we had these local resources here. She said they used nylon to sieve the condo so that it becomes light enough for a baby to be able to take. And this is what I was taking instead of the formula. And then when you grow a bit, then they would mix it with other things, maybe honey and other things that are okay for you at that level, till you get to the point where you are able to eat. But today, from the day the baby is born, we are immediately giving them all these foreign things, and then we add the foreign names to it. We've literally westernized these children, and we have accepted that it's like enlightenment is embracing these foreign things. So if you are enlightened, it means you embrace everything from the West. Unfortunately, these are some of the things that have been affecting us, because now when you've embraced this, this is how you are going to train your children, your nieces, nephews. This is the kind of socialization they are going to have. They would also hand it over to the next generation. And then we keep on doing it and doing it. I am very glad, for example, that we have a generation coming up that most of them are carrying local names. Most of them. Some, yes, even though they can't speak the local language, they are making the effort to learn some of them. So some effort is being made, but unfortunately, there are also those who think that, look, I'm educated, I have a Ph.D. or a degree or a master's, my children don't need to learn Twi or Ga or whatever, because maybe they would go to these international schools where they don't teach Twi and maybe end up in the UK or the US. They won't need Twi. So this is the kind of mindset that some people have, that these things have no value, so there is no need for us to invest in them, and it's contributing to the kind of results that we are also having. Thank you.
Okay. There's a question from Akosua Afriye. Do you have any suggestions for rekindling interest in our traditional stories, songs, and language among JHS and SHS learners?
So, thank you, Akosia. To do this, I would say that, first of all, storytelling is one of the approaches that we ourselves can use to teach. And I have come to realize, for example, when I teach my level 200s, that it's one of the most difficult things for students to do. So I would ask students, for example, that I would take just a proverb and say, okay, how does this proverb apply to your life? Like, look at something that happened to your life, relate it to this proverb. Just tell me a story about your own life. This is all I'm asking. And they will come back and say, oh, this is so difficult. You haven't taught us. My teacher didn't teach me. Like, who knows your life better than you? Who can tell your life story better than you, the individual? But you see, because they haven't been taught this approach, it becomes difficult for them to use it. And most of us as teachers don't also use this approach. It would be easy, for example, to teach research and use a story, or to teach about food and use a story. We can easily do some of these things, but most of us prefer to take that strict scientific approach, as we call it, and then we come definition of terms, and then go straight to the point. And so it's not a part of the students' training. But if we were to teach them to do this, this was last week Thursday. I was at a conference in honor of Ifwa Sutherland, and the keynote speaker was Prof. Kofi Anidoho. And he spoke for about an hour and a half, and all he did was to tell a story. That was the keynote address. And yet, that keynote address, probably we could write books out of it, because it was so deep. He didn't come with the typical scientific way of doing things. He based it on a story from his hometown when he was growing up. And he simply developed it. And we were just in awe. He couldn't finish because of time. We were in awe. But if we were teaching our students this way, they would easily get the message. Unfortunately, most of us don't do it that way. And so it becomes more challenging for the students when we now turn around to tell them that, give me something that I haven't given you. We haven't taught them, but we expect it. And so we would have to incorporate some of these things as part of our teaching, and then it will be easier for the students to learn the skill. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. There's an additional comment online from Dr. Hammond, who says, the best stage to start performing stories is the home, the family, and then in the primary schools. But we also have another question from one of my mentors, a mentor to many of us, Professor Adamoko Anbofo. She writes that one of the areas that has suffered a great loss is baby songs.
Yeah.
Can you share anything on those, or what the English call lullabies?
Thank you, Prof. Unfortunately, these songs were not part of my research, and now that you have mentioned, I think I should have asked, because I don't think I know them. I know a few of them in Cree, a few in English, but I didn't focus on that. And Prof, as for this one, I think the next time I will go back to Larteh, I would ask and let you know, because I didn't do this, and I am yet to hear one. I have never heard one. So I would have to ask about this. But I agree with Prof that this is an area that indeed we have really, really, really lost.
Very good, thank you very much. A question, comment? I know people have other meetings to attend. Prof thanks you for your response. Let's see, in the interest of time, I will ask 1 to 2 more questions. You've been very generous with your time, and we love your presentation. At AUCD, we are preparing to launch in the coming days or weeks an Institute of Indigenous Studies, which will be named after Professor Asari Apoku. And I'm aware of the outdooring of Ancestral Studies Initiative at UG. Do you envision your work as being integrated into, say, ancestral studies at Legon or anywhere
Let me say I have no idea when this ancestral studies is going to start. So I can't say much about it. I'm happy AUCC is looking at indigenous knowledge systems. At African Studies, one of the things that we teach, for example, is chieftaincy and development, how the chieftaincy institution is related. African appropriate technology, where we teach technology from our local communities. And the nursing school, for example, has made it compulsory for their nurses to take this kind of course. We have the languages that we teach, and then we have various courses, funerals, for example, an aspect that we have funerals and festivals also as a course. So what we have done is to take these various forms of indigenous knowledge, for example, and put them under various umbrellas so that they can be taught. And I think it's a good thing that AUCB is looking at doing this, because until we understand ourselves, understand our people, and can apply things to our own environment, it would be difficult for us to build on what we have. We have a system we want, we have an ideal that we think, oh, maybe things should run this way. But things are not that way, because those resources that would make them that way are not available to us here. But we have a system in place that is functioning, that we can build on to save ourselves all the stress. So literally what we are doing is we are trying to reinvent the wheel, which we shouldn't be doing, because the knowledge systems are already there. And all we have to do is know them and then teach our students to build on them. And this is what we are not doing, that is causing us a lot of challenges. And so for me, I am happy that AUCC, now AUCB, is going to be doing this. And I hope, this is my hope, that it will be a practical one, it won't be theoretical. Because the theory, it's easy to tell people all these wonderful things. But when it's practical and they can see it for themselves, they can apply it to their lives, then it becomes easier for them to build on them. Thank you.
Excellent response. I appreciate it very much. So I'll close with a question that's related to the information you just articulated. And it is in line with the mandate of this university. What advice would you give students reading communications and business from the perspective of your work on storytelling?
What advice? So communication and business, like I said, Prof. Anido, who is a literary scholar, use storytelling to wow all of us as a keynote speaker. The founder of this university himself is from literature. He was teaching at African Studies. And yet, if you look at his work, one of his seminal works that we still used to teach is on the Ochiame, and how the Ochiame, who is the linguist, uses the language of the people, that is their proverbs, their idioms, their indigenous knowledge, to communicate with the people in a way that enriches his language. If we are going to go out there and communicate, we are not going to sell to people who are aliens. We are selling to people here first, and then we are going out there. It is easy to communicate with knowledge that you already have, rather than going to read some Aristotle from somewhere or some Shakespeare. We have the Agidohos, the Awunos, all these people, the Yankers here with us, that if we know them, it is easier to communicate with the knowledge of the people themselves. If you are selling and you come to me and you are selling something that I can't relate with, it is more difficult for you to sell to me. You are trying to communicate. And if you are communicating to me, then I have to grasp what you are saying. I will summarize by saying something that Ngugi wa Thiong'o said. He said, when you speak to somebody using a foreign language, you are speaking to their head. But when you communicate with them using their own language, you are communicating to their heart. And this is what I would say our students in communication should be able to do. Speak to the heart of the people, and you've won them over already. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you too, Prof.
Yes. Well, again, that was a very riveting talk that Dr. Adjei shared with us. So I'd like to give him another round of applause and thank him for joining us. As we conclude this session of the Kwabena Nketia Center for Africana Studies African Diaspora Lecture Series, we extend our heartfelt gratitude to our speaker and participants, both in person and online, for their insightful contributions. Today's discussion has deepened our understanding of continental Africa and the African diaspora's impact and significance. Let us carry forward the knowledge and inspiration gained here, fostering continued dialogue and collaboration. We thank you for being a part of this journey. Until we meet again, keep the conversation alive. Thank you very much.